very nice tea, I can say. There are many other nice teas. This one was outstanding and also innovative. So I'm asked to, and I'm very glad to do so, to introduce David Paternotte, who's not only a colleague but also a very good friend, and who is a friend since many times. We met in many different places, on a social basis, on a scholarly basis. And I have brought also two of his books that so his first main work was about gay same-sex marriage in 3 countries, so France, Spain and Belgium. And to our regret he didn't include the Netherlands, but perhaps it had given a different perspective, but he will perhaps he's included many more countries today in his lecture, so he can extend on this issue. He has also he's now working on the international LGBT movement. It's one of his projects, and out of this project in the early stages came out already a book about the lesbian and gay movement and the states that he edited with 2 other people, and he wrote also himself the article on Belgium, and Tabitha Duivdag and I wrote the article about the Netherlands in this case. And today I don't want to harass you longer with all kinds of compliments and stories about our honored guest, who was also the first fellow of the Amsterdam Research Center for Gender and Sexuality, as also Chauvin already mentioned. And he was working also in the IDEA, so used also the local archives to continue his work. But what he will do today is continue with the first work, and that's about same-sex marriage. And he will discuss it not only in the Spanish, French and Belgian context, but also now in the context of global times, global debates, same-sex marriage worldwide. Well, the floor to David Paternotte.
So thanks a lot for the invitation, and I'm really happy to be back here, partly because, I know very people here, as Gert said, we have known each other for a couple of years. I met Robbie at the same time at the same conference in Paris in 2006, and I've known Sébastien for many years as well. We met in Chicago while he was still doing his PhD there a very long time ago. So, and I'm also very pleased to be here because I will be talking about same-sex marriage worldwide. This was a crazy project. There's been really a nightmare, and I spent kind of the whole week emailing friends all over the world to ask them to send me articles and information about what happened in their country. And I'm very pleased because, it's in Amsterdam. The first couples got married not very far from here about 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago. And since 2001, the situation has changed a lot worldwide. So it's what I will try to do today, and just to open, here you have only pictures on the PowerPoint from all over the world. So you have on the left, it's from a French newspaper, it's from Libération, it's from May or June. And you can see on the picture the spokesperson of the French LGBT movement. And next to him you can see Patrick Bloch, who was one of the main MPs involved in the PACs in the 90s. And on the other side of the picture, you see a poster for the campaign in Argentina. So, in his latest books, Jeffrey Weeks, if you don't know the book, just published earlier this year, the end of last year, it's a kind of dictionary with a lot of really short essays on various terms in sexuality studies. And there is an entry about same-sex marriage. And he writes in this book, in this kind of dictionary, this has been a major and largely unexpected transformation. In the 70s, with the rise of gay liberation, ideas across most Western countries, but particularly in the United States, no one, whether inside or outside the movement, raised the possibility of same-sex marriage. It seemed beyond the horizon of possibility, desirability, and intelligibly in the context of fair lesbian and gay critiques of the family and heterosexual marriage. And that's the important part of the quotation. But by the turn of the millennium, it had become the key issue in the LGBT world, and a hot political issue more widely throughout Western democracies. The rise of same-sex marriage as an issue signals 2 important intertwined changes. shifting priorities within the LGBT world itself, and changes within national cultures that were clearly liberalizing their attitudes and laws. And what I will try to do, I hope I won't be too long, is that, because it's very hard to speak about so many countries in a very short period of time, I will try to discuss this globalization of same-sex marriage. And I will not only address countries where same-sex marriage has been approved, it's about 10 countries today and 8 regions beyond these countries, but also countries where you have strong debates. Sometimes you have debates for many years, sometimes it's fairly recent, but you have a huge amount of countries all around the world. And I will try first to go through all those countries, and secondly, what I will try to do, and what we'll argue today, is that the explanations generally used in the past to explain why such debates can develop in a country are no longer valid, or they're still valid to explain a few cases, but probably we need to address other causes, other factors, but also playing a part and that go beyond what was said about the Netherlands or about Scandinavian countries. So I will. And as Gert said, well, I worked on Belgium, France, and Spain. I've also been involved recently in debates in Poland and Chile. And I've been lived in other countries, in the Netherlands, in the UK, in Canada. So I've been kind of following debates in different parts of the world. And what I'm trying here is to put everything together, which is really kind of a crazy project. And what I will try to explain, I mean, here you have this quote from an Argentinian activist, Bruno Bimbi, who said that the fact that something was happening in the Netherlands did not signify that it could happen in Argentina. And he said that last year in a book, he wrote a big book on same-sex marriage. And it happened. And I mean, here you have 2 pictures, the first couple, one of the first married gay couples in the world in Amsterdam 10 years ago. And then you had the first Argentinian and the first Latin American couple married last year in southern Argentina. So you know the story very well. I mean, the story as it is told most of the time is a story of 2 steps, historically. You had first civil partnership, different kinds of civil partnerships, and then you had marriage in different countries. And I'm really happy that Kees is there because, I mean, Kees has theorized, has theorized a model which has been widely quoted, and I will partly criticize this model in the lecture because I think it's maybe doesn't apply anymore in all the countries, which was a model in different steps. And the idea, you had the first step, which was decriminalization, then you had a second step, which was anti-discrimination law, then you had a civil partnership, and maybe at the end, civil marriage. And it was written at the time, there was only one country at the time in 2000 which had marriage, which was the Netherlands. So the situation has changed a lot. And the idea was that it was, according to Kees, and I'm just quoting, an internal logic in which each different step seems to pave the way for a next step. And this model has been widely quoted, and it has been really influential. And for instance, 2 of my colleagues writing about Belgium used that model and said not only it is impossible to take a next step until the previous one has been taken, each stage in the process also serves as a push towards the next. And at the same time, when Belgium approved the first civil partnership law, we had no anti-discrimination law. So the model only partly applied to the Belgian case. But still, it's, I think, a model which has been widely used. And as you see here, the first law was introduced in Denmark in 1989. One of the people in the picture is the founder of the Danish movement. He died 2 months ago. And this was the first time that a gay couple was married, kind of married, civilly recognized by the state. And at the time, it was only a specific partnership only for lesbian or gay couples. Then the Netherlands introduced in 1907 a first world premiere, which was a universal civil partnership, something which was also discussed in other countries in Europe, such as France or Belgium, that has also been applied in many countries in Latin America, which was the other kind of civil partnership open to every kind of couple, or even in Belgium, open to every kind of duo beyond couples. And then you had, and you know that, the second Dutch world premiere, which is same-sex marriage. And it happened, as you know, that the first couples got married in 2001. And since then, you had many more countries joining, and that's the interesting thing I will try to discuss today. You had Belgium as a second one, and I've been really lucky to be in Belgium at the time. Not because I got married, but because it gave me a lot of job and a lot of work. So then you had Spain, the other country where I'm partly living in, Canada, South Africa, Norway, Sweden, Argentina, Iceland, Portugal, more also a few regions, some 7 United States states, Connecticut, Washington, D.C., Iowa, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, and Vermont, and also the Federal District of Mexico. And then there are some tricky things about Brazil, but it's very tricky, so I won't enter into those details. And the story, as it is told at the level of activists, and I will be very quick because I think you know that, is the same story. You have 2 steps. First, civil partnerships, and then you have a civil marriage, and some of them not in all countries. And the idea also is that first, in a very classical way of seeing agenda setting, the first you had claims emerging among activists, and after a while it reached the public sphere, and finally the political arena, and it was approved often by parliaments, sometimes by courts, or sometimes by both. So I won't enter into the details. If you want, we can discuss what happened in different countries. So that's the story. But then I say, no, we have also the rise of a global debate, and you have lots of pictures here. One of my claims today is that both the nature and the status of same-sex marriage has changed dramatically in recent years. And while it historically derives from debates on civil partnerships, the demand appears now as a different and a more equal one, and the best way to recognize same-sex couples. We see also that it's no longer reserved to a few advanced, enlightened countries, such as the Netherlands or Scandinavia, but it may happen all around the world. And you have pictures here. I mean, you have, again, the first picture with the rainbow flag is from Argentina. You have the Spanish parliament there. And just remember, the guy in the middle with the long hair, which is Pedro Zerolo, is a key activist and political advisor, because you will find him as well. We will follow his adventures in Argentina and in Portugal later on in the lecture. You have a big picture from New York with people queuing on the first day they could get married. And you have also a picture of the first couples who got married in Mexico. So it's spreading all over the world in very unexpected places. And a third thing, which is important, is that although some countries are still, in some countries, activists are still asking for civil partnership, for instance, Poland or Chile, what they're asking in the long term is marriage. It's not only civil partnership, and they're only asking for civil partnership as a strategical claim, as a strategic goal, but they will move beyond that afterwards, or at least is the idea. So if you look at the countries, I told you 10 countries, 8 regions in the world recognize same-sex marriage today. And in some of them, it has been the result of a very long campaign, for instance, the Netherlands, also Belgium. But in others, like mostly Scandinavian countries, it was a very short campaign because they had first they were among the earliest countries to introduce a civil partnership. And it's the same thing if you look at countries where you have a debate on same-sex marriage. In some of them, like France, the campaign began in 1997. In others, like the UK, it began last year, or almost last year. So here, again, you have pictures of, I will not discuss the African one at the moment, but you have 2 pictures from the UK. The first one is a straight couple who is part of the Equal Love campaign, which is now in the United Kingdom. They have 2 claims. They want to open civil partnership to straight couples, and they want to open marriage to gay couples. And you have, below that, you have Peter Tatchell, the British activist, who is kind of giving a congratulation card to William and Kate, so the new Dukes of Cambridge, and asking for also saying that they want to access marriage as they did on that day, just in front of Buckingham Palace. And if you look at the countries, you have, as I told you, you have France and the UK, but you have also really advanced discussions in countries such as Brazil, Luxembourg, Mexico, Nepal, Scotland, lots of American states, China, South Korea, and this is China as well, Colombia, the Philippines, or India. So it's all over the world. You have also a few cases in the European Court of Human Rights. So things are moving very quickly. And which is also important, and this is the African thing. It comes from South Africa, but it's an illustration for the situation in many countries, is that if you see the geography or all the initiatives and declarations against same-sex marriage, you get even a more complex and a more complete picture because you get even more countries. And just to give you an idea, at religious level, the Catholic Church is more and more opposed to same-sex marriage, and mostly its opposition is becoming more and more visible. And probably one of the reasons is because key Catholic countries in Europe and Latin America are moving and have moved towards same-sex marriage. It's the same with evangelicals in the United States. They're also funding lots of campaigns. They did it in Canada, and now they're funding campaigns in Africa against same-sex marriage and promoting also the criminalization of sexual intercourses. And if you look at Africa, it's even more interesting because you see lots of things happening there. First, you have declarations against homosexuality or same-sex marriage. Secondly, you have countries, and it has been on the news, prohibiting homosexual intercourses in different cases. You have also, Nigeria is actually discussing a law which and that law would punish same-sex marriage with a jail sentence. But it's just a law really designed on same-sex marriage. And probably you have no activists there asking for same-sex marriage, which is really interesting. And at the same time, if you have, we had in the news lots of things about the violent attacks and incitations to hatred in lots of African countries. And interestingly, for instance, some happened just after same-sex marriage was in the international news. For instance, we had the decision by the Supreme Court of California in 2008. And very shortly after that, we had declarations coming from the President of Gambia asking for a kind of gay hunt in his country. And if you look into the arguments used, for instance, to criminalize homosexuality in a country such as Burundi, part of the main issue is not about sexual intercourses. It's really about, first, resisting Western and international injunctions, and Western, in this case, it's mostly about resisting what was asked by the United Nations in terms of AIDS prevention, but they couldn't do it, and they needed the money, so they did something else. And the other thing, they also wanted to resist things such as gay marriage. So as we see now, LGBT rights and gay marriage as part of it have entered, it has become, a central issue in symbolic international politics. And it also shows how this debate now is globalized. So a few remarks about what I've been saying is, as we see countries where same-sex marriage is debated and even approved, are more and more diverse, both culturally and geographically. It's 3 continents, and it is debated on the 5 continents at the moment. Secondly, the pace of adoption of same-sex marriage laws has accelerated in recent years. We needed 2 years between the first country and the second country, 2 or 3 years, depends how we count it. And in 2010, we had 3 countries approving same-sex marriage. So the pace has changed dramatically. Countries which had, third point, countries which had a generous civil partnership law, such as Denmark, Sweden, Norway, or the United Kingdom, have opened marriage or could open marriage soon, which is very interesting. And in that sense, maybe they're overcoming the cultural obstacles or the historical reasons that were often used to explain why they had a certain kind of status or legal status, which was a specific status in that case. And finally, maybe the sequences proposed by case are no longer met in a few cases. First, the time, that's not part of the sequences, but the time between the adoption of civil partnership law and the opening of marriage is extremely diverse. It has been very quick in countries such as the Netherlands or Belgium. It has been extremely slow in countries such as Scandinavia, for instance. So the time is changing a lot. Secondly, we see countries jumping the first step of civil partnership. They're moving directly to marriage. Or they had only a civil partnership at the regional level, like Spain or like Argentina. So it's becoming more complex. And finally, we see strange things. I said Belgium had no anti-discrimination law when we approved the first civil partnership law. It's also the case with Argentina. And I will go into a few other examples afterwards. And if we take the case of India, homosexuality was decriminalized 2 years ago. And they're already discussing same-sex marriage. So it is becoming extremely quick and extremely blurred as well. So if we try to explain why, what I will try to say is that some of the most common explanations are not working anymore, or they can explain a few countries but not the others. And I will try to add 2 factors that have maybe played a role. I'm sorry you can't see part of the slide. I don't know why, but you can imagine. that easily. And if you take, I mean, the most common explanations, most of the time, they saw civil partnership laws and same-sex marriage as two steps in the same debate. And often the reasons were used to explain the adoption of civil partnership laws. And then it was also expected in some of these cases that same-sex marriage would follow almost automatically, naturally, from the same process and for the same reasons. And I will discuss here four factors. The first one, as you see, is what I've called in my paper the big and heavy social processes. And I don't really believe in the big and heavy social processes, which are transformations of the family, marriage, couple, and these kind of things. And you know the argument which has been done by Anthony Giddens, by Ulrike Beck, and those people. And the idea is that both sociologists and demographers have unveiled dramatic changes in the meanings and practices associated with intimacy, the family, marriage, and that kind of things. And it is related to broader transformations in Western societies. And these changes were also coupled with wealth and with the development of the welfare state. And welfare state being really important in terms of breaking the importance of the family as an economic unit and a unit for survival. And as a result of those changes, the institutions that gay and lesbian activists are claiming at the moment are not the same as the one they were criticizing in the 70s. And the other element, which was also important, is that those transformations have also helped in terms of, for the society, the global society, to accept the claims and also to see the changes. For instance, in the sense that a gay couple is not seen anymore as really different from a straight couple. So they may have access to marriage as any kind of couple. And for instance, in his book, Jeffrey Weeks, in The World We Have Won, through the book, it's a book, if you don't know it, it's a book about transformations in gender and sexuality in the UK between 1945 and today, and 2005, more or less. And through the book, he has listed lots of factors that explain the changes in the UK. So the list is extremely long, but just to give you an example, you have things like a pluralization of sexual meanings and practices, a diversification of lifestyle and sexual cultures, a democratization and informalization of personal relationships, the connections between sex and reproduction, sex and marriage, marriage and parenting, and it's obviously fostered by the development of contraception and abortion, a withdrawing of the boundaries between the public and the private, particularly in relation with gender and sexuality, and the growing legitimacy of other kinds of couples, families, the new place given to choice, the self-love in how you build a relationship, all the kind of things that you have heard a lot, and that have been really influenced by the work of Anthony Giddens or Ulrike Beck. And that's true, it works in many countries. I'm not saying that's not true, I'm just saying that probably doesn't explain everything. And in the same way, a good friend of mine that some of you knows, the Dutch demographer, but he works in Lyon, Max Bandens, has tried to apply that kind of things, and following the work of Henning Becks from Denmark, he explains the adoption of same-sex partnership laws and same-sex marriage doesn't make any difference, by a combination of two factors, a high acceptance of the idea of same-sex marriage and a high rate of births out of wedlock, which is taken as an indicator of the decline of traditional marriage. And I took that from his work. And that's the first remark I'm saying against that. That's true, but you see big national disparities. Even within Europe, it's very hard to find that number. So I haven't found numbers at a global level at the moment. And I have to calculate it myself. But you see, I mean, you have really high levels in Scandinavia, which were the fun countries to introduce that kind of thing. But then it's extremely low in Spain compared. I mean, you have a huge difference. It's probably more important than if you take a country as well. But it's still, among Europe, you have huge differences. And it's the same if you take other kind of numbers. The second element is that often it is thought that, I mean, it's also linked to a decline of family values. And again, for instance, the work by the Spanish anthropologist, José Ignacio Pichardo Galán, he shows in his PhD dissertation that this is not the decline of family values that have facilitated the adoption of same-sex marriage in Spain. It's, on the contrary, the strength of family values that have been one of the key factors explaining the development of same-sex marriage in Spain. So it's more complex than what is often assumed. And a third element, often we think that we have changes in gender and changes in sexuality going all together, and also at the level of policies and laws. And if we take the countries I've quoted, if we take divorce, for instance, it's a very new thing in countries such as Spain, Portugal, or Argentina. And it's a very old thing in countries such as the Netherlands. So the experience is totally different. And again, if we take abortion, it's even more interesting because Argentina or Mexico are still criminalizing abortion. And at the same time, Argentina has a very progressive law for transsexuals approved a few months ago, but they're still criminalizing abortion. So the relation is more complex. I don't know how it works, but it doesn't work as we say it should work. And again, if we take South Africa, it's even more interesting. Judith Stacy, the American anthropologist, has written very interesting things about the concomitance of the adoption of polygamy and the adoption of same-sex marriage in South Africa. So it's very complex, again, how it works. So that's the first factor. If we take the second factor, which is often used from Henrik Beck, from his key work on Denmark, is the decline of homophobia. The idea is that a country is more likely to debate same-sex marriage and to adopt such a law if homophobia is low, and the different ways of calculating homophobia. And, for instance, if you take the work done by Lee Badgett, a big comparison mostly between the Netherlands and the United States about same-sex marriages, I mean, she tests various variables to understand why countries introduced civil partnership laws. And she comes with two waves in Europe. The first wave, all the countries that have adopted such a partnership before 2000, and then all the others after 2000. And she sees differences between the two groups, but she says that in the two groups, the low religiousness and the high tolerance of homosexuality are key elements. And she says there are prerequisites to adopt such a law. And that's probably true, but still, if we look at numbers, I did that very roughly this afternoon. It's just a question whether homosexuality is always justifiable. And I took the countries I could find in the World Values Survey, but you have extremely high levels, and these are countries where same-sex marriage has been approved or is under discussion. It's very high in the Netherlands. Interestingly, it's very high in Slovenia, which was almost adopting same-sex marriage and finally didn't happen. And it's extremely slow in South Africa. It's extremely low in South Africa, for instance. So again, I'm not saying that it's the best indicator, but I'm saying that it's very diverse.
What was the question that you referred to? It's not clear to me.
The question was whether homosexuality is always justifiable. Yes, but I just took the measure of the always. Yes, yeah. Yeah. So there are very rough numbers, and it should be, I should add more, but just give you an idea. And what I'm interested in here mostly is South Africa, as you can imagine. And again, some of the countries, I mean, some of the people working on Portugal, for instance, are saying that homophobia is still extremely high in Portugal. And some of the Portuguese colleagues have written about this. And at the same time, if you take, for instance, homophobic attacks, it's very hard to have numbers, and I haven't found any reliable numbers, because it's about reporting, and maybe people are just reporting more, that kind of thing. But still, South Africa or Mexico are often on the news for the violent homophobic attacks. And I mean, there was a campaign a few days ago about South Africa and rapes of lesbians, those kind of things. They're still really important in those countries. And a third element, which is important as well, is that now you have authors like Judith Takacs, who studied here in this university with Gert a few years ago, and she's now working in Budapest. And she calculated the contrary. She calculated how civil partnership laws and same-sex marriage were contributing to a decrease of homophobia. So we have no more and more people who are kind of reversing the relation between the two variables and saying that instead of that you don't need, and the argument was the same in Spain, that you don't need a very high level of acceptance, but that that acceptance will increase because of these laws. Maybe it can be both, but people are reversing the relation. So a fourth factor, and you don't have numbers, you just have funny pictures from Latin America. A third factor is the importance of religion. And it goes two ways. The first element, which is often been discussed, is the importance of religiousness. And the idea is that if you have a low level of religiosity, it means mostly church attendance, then you have more chances to get a civil partnership or to get a marriage. And for instance, Javier Corrales, who spoke here in Amsterdam, and Mario Peceni from Buenos Aires, argue that, for instance, Argentina has a low rate of religiosity than Mexico, the United States, or Brazil. And that's a reason why, it's one of the reasons why it was first in Latin America. And yes, that's probably true, but still, South Africa has probably a higher, I couldn't find the numbers, so I'm still looking, so but I expect that it's higher, and it is certainly also high in the United States. So we should see in the United States by state and how it happens in every state. But still, it's more complex. And what is more interesting, I think, is I think that the closeness of secularization matters. It means, I mean, in countries like Argentina or regions, Flanders, Quebec, or Spain, secularization is a very new thing. They were extremely strong Catholic countries until very recently. And what has happened, for instance, in Spain, is that same-sex marriage has been used to prove that they were really secular and that they were really modern. And that the issue could be used in the political process and in the claiming process as a way to say, look, we are really modern, we don't listen to the church anymore. And here you have, I mean, on the left, you have newspapers from Chile in August. And the one that's Ciudadano in the middle, it's about gay marriage. They were discussing that in Chile at the time in August. And you have two priests. Is the way they saw it in a kind of humoristic newspaper. And the other one is from Argentina. And it says that the church is adapting to new conditions. And not the church is not opposing gay marriage, but gay divorce. And if you take, again, the religious factor, the other claim that you find often is that Protestant countries are more open and more likely to adopt that kind of status than Catholic countries. It was certainly based on Scandinavia. But the problem of the problem when we talk about Protestant countries first, well, it doesn't work if we look at numbers. Some colleagues did, and it doesn't work. But then if you look at what is Protestantism, it's not the same in the Netherlands or Scandinavia and in the UK or in the United States. They're totally different things, or in Latin America. And secondly, we find that lots of countries who have adopted same-sex marriage are either mixed religious countries, such as the Netherlands, or former Catholic countries, such as Belgium, Spain, Argentina, Portugal, for instance. So it's more complex. And final factor is the strength of the movement. And here you get a picture. They were certainly not asking for same-sex marriage. It's the Gay Liberation Front on Trafalgar Square in the early 70s. And the final explanation you can find is that the debates emerge because the movement is strong, and is strong enough to impose the issue on the agenda. And that's, again, very true. And I work on social movements, so I will say it's very true, but it doesn't work everywhere. And first, I mean, it's obviously an explanation you will find in books by people who were part of the movement. And you have plenty of that books. So they will obviously say it's thanks to us. And sometimes, like the Bruno Bimbi I quoted, some of my Argentinian colleagues will say that you forget that there were other people around. So that's the first explanation. We can also find that in some of academic works where you stress the importance of social movements. Again, my colleagues from Paul Box and Bart Eckart from Antwerp and Ghent argued that in the case of Belgium, it is true. I did the same, but it's probably not the only element. Jordi Diez from Canada argued the same for Mexico and Buenos Aires, so it works. But again, there's some shortcomings. First, anyone working on social movements knows that a social movement is successful not only because it's well organized, it's very strong, but it's also, it will win because of the context. And because the context has changed, is what we call opportunities. Second element is that social movement changes a lot. And what you see, for instance, in the Spanish case, Germán Calvo, who wrote the Spanish chapter in the book that Gert showed you, says in this book and in other publications that what happened in Spain is the history of a reciprocal relationship where the socialists wanted to change, they needed something new, same-sex marriage was something new, and the gay movement adapted to become less radical and to enter in the kind of discourse which was expected by the state to be heard. So it's really kind of the two evolutions, both from the political scene and from activists that happened. And then another shortcoming which is important is that the division between social movement on the one hand and politicians on the other hand doesn't work in many cases. In many cases, you see in many countries that key activists entered politics and played a very important role. And that happened in Belgium, that happened in Portugal, that happened in Spain with the guy I showed you, Pedro Zerolo, who was the chairperson of the Spanish LGBT Federation before becoming one of the key advisors of Zapatero in charge of LGBT matters, among other things. And it also happened in Mexico, so it's something different. And finally, the most interesting things is that you have countries where you have a debate on same-sex marriage and you don't have any movement. That's the case of Luxembourg, for instance. There is no gay movement in Luxembourg, a very tiny one, but the issue was mostly promoted by a local politician who is now the mayor of Luxembourg City. So it's not really because the movement was strong in Luxembourg that the debate was happening. And if you go to ILGA Europe or that kind of meetings, you don't see anyone from Luxembourg. And again, in Chile, for instance, interestingly, when the debate on same-sex marriage, not partnership, but really same-sex marriage started about 2 or 3 years ago, most activists were not really happy with that because they were not really in favor of same-sex marriage, partly because many people are still in the closet, for instance, on the workplace. So you won't get married because it's a public act. Maybe you are more likely to enter something which is private, like a civil partnership. And they didn't at the time consider it as a priority. It has changed in the meanwhile. But it happened because MP found the issue really interesting because of what was happening in Spain and the United States. And he submitted a bill in Parliament about same-sex marriage. And then the movement was obliged to move and to support that. And you know that in the Netherlands, the COC was not in favor of marriage for a long time. And it happened because other actors pushed the issue. So the movement is not always the key actor. And other people, other kinds of movement can be mobilized. So that's for all the new shortcomings, the new limits of old explanations. So what I'm trying to say here, I'm trying to defend that 2 other factors, at least there are probably others, are important. And the first one, which is the longest one, the other one is very short, is the transnational and international politics of same-sex marriage. And I like, for the people who know my work, I'm among the people who are really defending the importance of looking at the international and transnational sphere arena and what's happening there. And the problem of most of the research is, most of the work I presented you, is that most of the time there are national studies that have worked on a specific country, but it's just they have studied the Netherlands or they have studied Sweden or the UK, but they haven't looked in a kind of a more global way. And I think it changes the factors you will find. And argue that the globalization of same-sex marriage takes part into the globalization of sexual identities and sexual claims as it has been defended by people like Dennis Altman or John Beanie, for instance. And in that context, debates and campaigns on same-sex marriage frames, strategies, are no longer held within hermetic national borders, but are increasingly shaped by transnational exchanges and other kinds of international influences. The claims circulate beyond state boundaries, and I will give you examples and also pictures, are imported and exported by domestic actors and are resignified. So the debates are not only global, but also transnational and supranational. And in that context, very few people have tried to apply that to same-sex couples and their recognition. One of the exceptions is Kelly Coleman from the University of Glasgow. I won't explain what she said, but I can explain it if you want to. And I think it's even truer for same-sex marriage. It applies even more to same-sex marriage for 2 reasons, probably. Because of the claim itself, and I will explain that at the end, and also because of the new context. We have new technologies. It's cheaper to travel. We have the internet. We have the global mass media, what I was explaining about Africa before. And we have also multi-level governance structures, particularly in Europe and Latin America, who are also playing a part into that. So, just to give you a few examples of what's happening, what France is feeling increasingly backward between Belgium and certainly Spain, Luxembourg is trying to catch up with other Benelux countries, as they did on euthanasia a few years ago. The Scandinavian domino effect that worked for civil partnerships is working again, apparently, for same-sex marriage. Argentina and Brazil are becoming, also for LGBT issues, model states in Latin America. And then you have also declarations by very unlikely people, like the First Lady of Albania or the King of Cambodia. So it's really traveling all around the world. And a few events played an important part. Obviously, what happened in the United States since a Y, so you have a Y there, the civil rights thing. And then you have California with, here you can see a San Francisco mayor on the picture. And Simpson is not just for, I'm sure it has been important. But I mean, the United States, because it's the global state, has been really important. And debates in the United States have been discussed all around the world. And another key event that happened is Spain. The Spanish decision has been really important in showing that not only really far advanced enlightened countries such as the Netherlands could have same-sex marriage, but also countries which are, that was probably not that true, but were thought as being really Catholic and backward. And it has been really important in countries such as France, Sweden, Italy, and above all, Portugal and Latin America. Then you have groups of actors and mechanisms that have been important. If you take activists, you have two kinds of mechanisms. You have diffusion, that is punctual exchanges between activists from different countries. It can be direct with exchanges or indirect with just people looking on the web or that kind of thing. And this is an example of direct diffusion. The guy in the middle is the guy you saw in the Spanish parliament, is Pedro Zerolo, and here he's talking in the Argentinian Senate. And you can see Eva Perón, the statue just behind him. And what he's doing there, I mean, activists in Argentina has called him the father of gay marriage in Argentina. The Spanish government put a lot of money in international cooperation to allow gay activists from Spain, Zerolo and others, to travel through all Latin America and explain what they did. And Zerolo has been really important in debates in Argentina. He was part of, just in proposing arguments, discourses. Then he was part, this is a commission in the parliament, and he was also there when the law was approved, among other actors. So that's the kind of exchanges which are taking place between activists, and it has been important there. This is what has been called by colleagues from San Francisco, progressive colonialism. I'm not sure I like the expression, but I think it's very clear. Another case is indirect diffusion. That's this. This is what happened, for instance, in France. You have Noël Mamère, the Green MP in the middle, who celebrated an illegal marriage in 2004. And it happened partly because of two international events. There are also domestic reasons. But it also happened at the time Zapatero was elected and said he would open same-sex marriage. And it happened at the same time as the debates in San Francisco. And the other example is just activists are looking abroad. There you have a really recent poster from Italy, and you can see one of the signs is Islanda, Olanda, Belgio, quando l'Italia, which is really kind of comparing what's happening in one country with what's happening in another country. And that's even more interesting. That comes from Acta Paris. They wanted to have a new campaign on same-sex marriage, and they put that on the web, asking for people to vote and choose their best campaign. That was one of the campaigns. And basically, if you don't understand French, they're just comparing about Spain, Iceland, Mexico, the Netherlands, and New York, saying that those countries open marriage in the year, and you have the year. And then they say about nothing has changed. In Iceland, they're talking about the volcano. In the Netherlands, they're talking about that everyone is leaving the Netherlands massively except for holidays. That in Spain, they're still very good at football. That New York, there is no reaction, even not the Dow Jones. And in Mexico, that the sun is always singing, under the beautiful sky of Mexico. So it's really the kind of things which are happening and what activists are doing. And activists, and that's the first thing. The second thing, the second factor is what I call networking and social learning. It's kind of very boring words from international relations. And basically, it's the idea that you don't only have people importing, exporting things and having punctual exchanges, but really people working together and elaborating claims together. And my research on Belgium, France, and Spain, and it's another reason why I'm happy to have Case here, because I think it's part of that story, is that you have, for instance, among other things, the importance of a transnational network of lawyers and legal scholars who have been really important both nationally in what happened in the Netherlands, or Robert Wintermute, for instance, is one of the advisors of the Equal Marriage Campaign in the UK, but they also have been important internationally in kind of elaborating a discourse about marriage and discrimination, equality, and linking all those concepts all together. And they have really made a bridge between the different levels. And it also happened at the level of judges. You have judges just quoting sentences from other countries, and also politicians. Again, that's Portugal. You see, again, Pedro Zerolo. It's really, as you see, very active, and you have other people, the director of ILGA Europe and other people there. And Socrates, the former Portuguese prime minister. And this picture is when same-sex marriage was approved in Portugal. And according to Portuguese colleague, you had really a Zapatero effect in Portugal, and it has been really important. And actually, the campaigns started in Portugal in 2004 when Zapatero was elected. So it has been really important. And at the same time, in France, for instance, when Spain approved same-sex marriage, everyone, including Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who was the first one, they tried to support same-sex marriage. They were changing discourse, and the thing really was who would be the first elephant, as they called in the Socialist Party in France, to be in favor. And it's Dominique Strauss-Kahn who won far before the others. And in Italy, at the same time, Prodi, also a left-wing politician, was really trying to say that the civil partnership had nothing to do with what Zapatero was doing in Spain. So you see this kind of contamination between countries, and you can have lots of other examples. So what we see about this is that first, as Daniel Borillo, an Argentinian lawyer working in France, argued, same-sex marriage appears more and more as a thermometer of modernity. It's a way to see whether countries are modern or not, whether they're secular or not, and also in the international arena, it's a way to give positive signs. It's what Zapatero did, among other things, and he did the same about gender equality. The same in Luxembourg during the debates. They were really saying that they needed same-sex marriage to be modern in Luxembourg. Second element is that you see that the pressure on political parties is increasing. No left-wing social democratic parties have to be in favor of same-sex marriage. That happened very recently in Australia and in Germany, and probably they will have other countries. But it's even happening among conservatives. And you've probably heard the declarations by David Cameron a few months ago saying that he was in favor of same-sex marriage. And finally, what is also important is that those politicians did that also because they expected a political reward. It has been important in Spain in terms of being modern, also because he didn't expect to be elected. And finally, he kept his promise, but probably he would have another discourse. He would have had another discourse. In Belgium, it was used to show that Christian Democrats were not in the government. And we needed something to show that we were really secular with other Christian Democrats. And we used same-sex marriage. And in Portugal, it has been also approved in the context of the economic crisis, which has been probably really important. And maybe also in Iceland, but I'm not sure about Iceland. About the reasons why it was just suddenly approved at the time. And as you see, same-sex marriage is in the air du temps. So most LGBT movements feel obliged to endorse it. And it is no longer a problem for politicians to endorse it, at least some politicians. And so the idea is that you have the emergence of what we call an international norm about same-sex marriage. That's a thing that has been claimed by a few colleagues about LGBT rights. Kelly Coleman said that about civil partnerships. And I said it's maybe happening in the case of same-sex marriage. And what is an international norm? The idea is that nation-states are not bounded, autonomous functioning systems. On the contrary, nation-states are increasingly constructed from and influenced by world models of progress and justice, set forth as universalistic scripts for authentic nation-statehood. And if we go on with those quotes by people defending the world society approach, these worldwide models define and legitimate agendas for local action, shaping the structures and policies of nation-states and other national and local actors in virtually all of the domains of rationalized social life, business, politics, education, medicine, science, even the family, that's what I'm talking about, and religion. And just to give you an example, we see the contrary. Some MPs are now really referring to, if you look at debates, to the pressure coming from abroad to resist. You had the Commission, a wonderful report in France in 2006 about the family, where conservative MPs were trying to argue that they had to defend a French difference, a French exception against globalization of family law. And you have wonderful quotes in that report really arguing that. And my colleague Roman Kuhar from Slovenia found the same in Slovenian debates. And just to give you an example, which is about the Netherlands, one of the MPs said during the debates, it was in 2003, which is important for the end of the quote, "We cannot uncritically accept all models and patterns from the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, the negative trends of too much liberality and of decisions that were made too quickly are already obvious." And that was in 2003. You also forget that big European countries, such as Greece, Italy, Austria, and also Luxembourg, which is a very big country in Europe, as you know, have not regulated the issue yet. So it's really the kind of quote you find, and it's kind of really kind of saying, well, probably they feel there is a kind of pressure or something happening that they can hardly resist. And finally, the other argument is about the legal discourse. I think there is also something which is specific about the claim itself. and it is an important factor in the way it can travel more easily than civil partnership. As you know, or probably, you know that the discourse in favor of same-sex marriage is intrinsically a legal discourse, which is profoundly shaped by a legal conception of equality. For people campaigning for same-sex marriage, denying same-sex couples the right to marry is discriminatory, because two people in a similar situation must be treated the same way. Equality, therefore, is constructed as the opposite of discrimination, and inequality is seen as an illegitimate difference of treatment or a kind of privilege. And if this discourse displays national specificities, you can find that kind of discourse absolutely everywhere. You have a campaign on same-sex marriage, and you have codes all around. And what I found in my own research on Belgium, Spain, and France is one of the reasons why the campaigns moved from civil partnership, from same-sex marriage, is when you had a cognitive change. And that cognitive change was the importance taken by legal discourse. The legal discourse was there from the start. But it was not the only discourse. What happened is that suddenly it became disconnected from other kind of social projects. For instance, some people were rejecting marriage and promoting civil partnership because they wanted to change society. Is what, for instance, the French, the first one to propose the Pax, Jean-Paul Poliquin and that kind of people, they were activists from the 80s, and they really didn't want to have marriage because they really wanted to change heterosexual relationships, which is probably happening with the Pax, because you know that 80% of the people entering a Pax are straight couples. And it's what they did. But then suddenly, for lots of reasons, and I'm not go into that, those two things were disconnected. And logic of equal rights became the only logic of the campaign. And as you know, if you have done very little, political philosophy, there are lots of definitions of equality which are possible. You have libraries full of books about what does equality mean. So that's one version of equality that has been important, and it's probably linked to important transformations within the gay and lesbian movement, and particularly with the relation to law. I'd like you to know the place that law is probably a kind of matrix from which the whole mobilization arises. It has influenced the claims, but also the framing, the strategies that have been adopted by movements. And I think it's important to understand why it has been globalized. First, because the law is not only something you will use in court, but it's also a system of beliefs, values, codes, references, and actors. And it's important in the sense that by privileging a very legal definition, I think that the activists have increased the capacity to make connections with other actors in society, and they allowed the claim to resonate, as we say in social movement studies, more with other things in the society, and probably more than civil partnerships. Because the discourse, and also the other thing is that the discourse was a very easy, difficult discourse to turn down, because they were talking about equality. So opponents had to say that they were against equality, or they had to say something else. But it was more difficult to argue, because it was a very easy and very straightforward argument. And also you see that in the cartoon on the left, it's also that it allowed connections with other equality struggles. And you have here the thing about interracial marriages in the United States, which has been a key argument, certainly in the States, but also elsewhere. And a second element is that I think also that this legal dimension, strong legal dimension, allows the claim to facilitate its travel internationally, because it's less bounded to national domestic conditions. It's more kind of abstract discourse. And also, most democracies have the same legal system, and they have certainly protection of anti-discrimination and equality. It's also part of human rights discourse. And it's also probably one of the reasons why some of the countries, like the UK or Scandinavian countries, are moving or have moved towards same-sex marriage, although some people were saying that they wouldn't be interested for cultural, historical reasons, because this legal discourse is really hard to resist. And is what the English legal scientist Carl Sitchin called the constitutively universalizing character of human rights discourse, or the cosmopolitan and globalizing nature of human rights law, which is part of that discourse. And finally, I've already mentioned that, so I will be very quick, but the legal world has its own actors. There are a lot of books about activism by judges, certainly in the United States. But there are also people studying what they call cause lawyering. It's mostly the involvement, the activism of lawyers and legal scientists in pushing issues in different ways activism is probably not the best word, but I told you about Europe and the importance, I think, of this transnational network of lawyers. And you see that they've both played a part in a transnational level, or at the level of ILGA or the European Court of Human Rights or that kind of things, but also nationally. Most of them also have played an important part in national struggles, as case in the Netherlands, Daniel Barrio in France, Robert Wintermute in the UK, and others. And that has been probably also important. And the main belief they have, it comes from Stefano Fabeni, who founded one of the first networks, Psychosis, quote from the Journal of Homosexuality. He says that in countries where the legal debate is not developed and the legislative reforms are weak or non-existent, the circulation of legal information, the promotion of legal events, and the exchange of experiences among experts on an international scale are central points for combating discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity and promoting the legal recognition of same-sex couples. And I think it's what happens. And finally, the conclusion is not yet the conclusion, so I will give you the conclusion next. So what I've tried to do, I've underlined the global nature of the debate on same-sex marriage. And I've tried to show that, no, you have a debate which is global, it's also transnational, it's also supranational, claims are traveling in various ways with various actors. Secondly, no, we have, it was true for same-sex unions, but this happens even more, I think, with same-sex marriage for the reasons I've explained. And no, you see that in most parts of the world, activists are not only claiming a civil partnership, what they want in the long term is marriage. And not marriage as a kind of abstract reference, as it could have been in the past, but just a kind of really what they want to achieve. But maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but a bit later on. Another element which is important is that, no, you see that this claim is not limited to Western countries, not anymore. You have that happening in lots of different countries, and that the sequences that I've discussed are changing. The order changed. Maybe you have the anti-discrimination law after marriage, or maybe not. Or maybe they're just jumping, and they're not respecting, they're not going through one of these stages. And so the model is still valid in explaining what's happening. But things are probably more complex than what could have been said 10 years ago. And I've also tried to show you that the reasons used in the literature to explain why such debates could emerge and could also develop in different countries were still valid for some countries, but we needed other reasons, we needed other things. And I've tried to insist on what happens as a consequence of transnational, international politics of same-sex marriage, and probably as a result of those dynamics, the emergence of an international law or something that could be described. It's very hard to know when we have an international law emerging, because soft law is it's not hard law, it's not on the books. But we could have something like this happening, and I think also that it has been facilitated by the legal nature of the discourse. And finally, I've tried to show you that political science and international relations are interesting to talk about sexuality, because most of the debates was made, most of that discourse has been produced mostly by sociologists and demographers. And I have really few colleagues from political science who try to do things on this. Now, if we try to conclude, as globalization itself, the globalization of same-sex marriage is a very contradictory and a very paradoxical phenomenon. On the one hand, we can have what I've called the open future of same-sex marriage. We have seen that you don't need the structural conditions that were thought necessary in cases like Scandinavia or the Netherlands to approve same-sex marriage. So it means that you have no inevitability. You need agency. If you have no actors, if you have no social actors, you won't have same-sex marriage. It doesn't happen like this. But certainly you don't have fatality, in the sense that you can have same-sex marriage even if you have a high level of homophobia, for instance. Second element, on the other hand, maybe you have the dangers of globalization. One of my colleagues in Brussels wrote about the feminist movement, and she said that there was, because of best practices, a danger of McDonaldization of the feminist movement. And she says that McDonaldization implies offering access to a product, here it would be same-sex marriage, to a wide audience that might not be informed otherwise with the kind of seal of approval of uniform usefulness. And she says the most popular solutions from one culture are more easily diffused to others. And the risk is that we may see fast food feminism. I have no answer. Is same-sex marriage part of fast food LGBT struggles or not? Do we have a marginalization of LGBT claims? I don't know, but what you see first, I mean, some people like Joseph Massad or Puar used Puar, I mean, Massad criticized the Gay International, as you know, and Puar used same-sex marriage as one of the examples promoted by this international culture. And what you see happening, I won't discuss what they said, but partly because I don't agree, but first you have same-sex marriage has become probably the flagship of a kind of international gay movement. It is becoming more and more. And for instance, in May this year, a former Flemish MP, and she is not conservative, she's not a liberal, she's not the Belgian Geert Wilders, she's from the Greens, and she's a human rights law professor, wrote a piece in the Standard saying that she wanted, just before the Gay Pride, Belgium to use same-sex marriage as a Belgian exportation product. And it's really the kind of thing that could be happening. And for instance, when I went to Poland, I was invited to a conference organized by the Polish movement, but paid by the Dutch embassy and the Flemish embassy in Warsaw. So these things are happening. And the other thing, which I think, is that you have potentially a disconnection of the claims which are made and the local situation of LGBT people in a certain country. The example I gave you about Chile, that 2 years ago, activists didn't want marriage because they thought that they had other priorities given the state of LGBT issues in their country. We may also argue with that, but that's a potential risk. And we see in Africa how, where people are not claiming for, are not asking same-sex marriage, still it is being discussed because of the international media. And finally, what I told about international norms are it's always an elite-driven process. It's made by a few activists meeting a few politicians in a very small circles. And it's a very elite-driven process. Whether it relies on changes, on really grassroots changes and grassroots agency or not, it's also a question open to discussion. And finally, the final point, I think...
What about Islamic countries? Because you say it's a globalization.
Can you leave to the discussion?
Yeah.
Okay, is there time for a discussion?
Yeah.
And finally, is that the final lines is that it also means that if the same claim is adopted in different countries, it implies also that this claim and this law will have different consequences in different countries. And I think it's a really important issue because the meaning and the context are different. And you see that, for instance, between Spain and the Netherlands. I told you briefly about the research by one of my Spanish colleagues, but marriage is still really important. The family is still a key value in Spain. And it's one of the reasons why same-sex marriage was approved and was privileged over civil partnership in terms of claims. And in that sense, having a country where marriage is really important and a country where no one is getting married, if you approve same-sex marriage, it doesn't mean the same thing in that society. And we need sociologists to see the effects of what happens. And the other thing, if we take, because I come from Belgium, the difference between Flanders and Wallonia, we have, well, yeah, they're more Flemish, but we have more marriages in Flanders. And it's really the Flemish movement was better organized, or was really going for same-sex marriage. And the explanation of some of my Flemish colleagues is that there are more marriages because there is less homophobia in Flanders. And I have an alternative explanation. It's also about the consequences and the importance of local context. Is that maybe it's also, maybe it's because of homophobia, but it's also maybe because people in Francophone Belgium, which was secularized long before Flanders, because of the Industrial Revolution, that kind of things, is just maybe less marriage crazy than the Flemish. So, thank you.
I've sent for a very rich lecture with a lot of examples, and it's very remarkable that we as the Dutch, who have the first same-sex marriage, have very few sociologists working on this issue, or no sociologists, I can say. Perhaps one lawyer, but... Okay, but the floor is open to you for discussion of this, the many points you raised. There was already one question, but...
Yeah, Matthias had a question.
Thank you very much. But, I have three questions to make. First, you say it's globalization without any reservation, but I think the idea that the whole Islamic world does not take part in it, and it raises a more interesting question, why there is no, I think there is no, you mentioned Joseph Massad. Why is there not any idea about a gay Islamic marriage, which could be possible in theory? And this is the first question. How do you relate that to your story? The second question, as you said, it is kind of a barometer for international modernity. At the same time, it's interesting to know that the man who promoted the gay marriage as the first in the Netherlands, Henk Krol, against the ideas of the gay movement, is now the first one to say, because the gay marriage is here, I declare the end of the gay movement, everything is equal, work is done. So in fact he promotes the deactivation of the gay movement. While I said, I thought the gay marriage could serve as a yardstick for international social justice. Use these signs that, let's say, certain international bodies simply say countries that do not have access to equal marriage, yeah, we do not consider them as countries supporting full human rights, so they cannot take part to certain international bodies. It's a question to you, but maybe also the case of Albeck. Because that's what I thought Mr. Kroll should say. He should use this new level of acceptance for a new level of international acceptance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So the first question, well, I'm also bonded by my own language limitations. So I mostly studied the countries where I can read things and I can understand what was going on, and also the countries I was aware of things. About Muslim countries, I mean, the example I said about Africa, you had declarations from Senegal. Senegal is mostly a Muslim country. So the globalization is going both ways. It's also going through hostile reactions, not only people approving that. And for instance, one of the co-editors of the book Get shows, Carol Johnson from Australia, she wrote, for instance, a piece comparing the discourse by John Howard, the former Australian Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister of Malaysia, who's a Muslim person. And she argues in this piece, and I think she's convincing, that they use the same arguments against same-sex marriage. They're both opposing same-sex marriage, and they use both of them with the same arguments. So I imagine there is definitely a discussion about this in Malaysia. So maybe it's more about the Middle East, but about the Middle East I have no clue, so I can't really say what's going on. And about Israel, for instance, I did recently with Robert Whitton, and Robert explained to me that the thing is that there is no civil marriage in Israel, and it's very hard for the Freedom to organize it. And it's a country which could be the one moving, maybe, but because I said a few declarations. And about the other question, but I think there are different things. First, about the struggle for international struggle. First, if you look at movements, what happened in I don't know about the Netherlands, but what happened in Belgium or what happened in Spain is that after the adoption of same-sex marriage, movement were kind of a bit lost. And certainly in Belgium, once we had adoption 3 years later, because they put a lot of energy and put a lot of efforts into those campaigns, those strategies, and then after that, they were kind of a bit lost. It's like when you have an exam, and when the exam is done, you don't know what to do. There's the same kind of feeling, probably. And they tried to do other things. And if you take the Flemish LGBT Federation, was really the group behind the same-sex marriage in Belgium, and really promoted it. It's probably one of the strongest groups in Europe. There are lots of them. There are 15 people working for a population which is about 6 million. They came back into ILGA Europe at the time, and they started to work at international level when they thought everything was solved at Flemish level. And in Spain it's the same. I explained a little story about Pedro Zerolo going to Argentina, but at some point the Spanish LGBT Federation was really thinking about opening an office in Buenos Aires. Finally, it didn't happen. But there was a group in Buenos Aires, the CHA, but they decided to start a new federation for same-sex marriage in Argentina, and it's almost the same name as the Spanish Federation because the inspiration comes from Spain. So the Spanish is the FER with an E, and the Argentinian is the FAR with an A. So it's almost the same thing. It's because of that reason. If you just do actors and if you read what that reason. So I mean, they've used that as a way to go abroad. And if you take international bodies, I think Case knows that better than me, but you see, as far as I understand it, while I'm not a lawyer, that you have also an evolution, certainly in European courts, not for same-sex marriage, but for the equality of rights. So things are moving. I know you have a few cases out of the European Court of Human Rights, specifically on same-sex marriage, so we'll see there are more, but there's certainly a British case and there's a French case, so we'll see what happens. But things are moving. It's not yet considered as, you don't need that. Not even the equality, legal equality, to be accepted, but conditions are changing.
Thank you. So if that's, can you keep the questions short because we're running late? Yeah, and also the answers.
We have time because we
Well, but well, I guess it's also yeah, Kees. No, you criticize, so
thank you very much.
defend yourself.
I'm criticized on one theory I did not never propose.
Oh, really?
There is a basic sequence, I think, and it applies even in Belgium if you count collective labour agreements, decriminalisation, anti-discrimination, partnership recognition. What form partnership recognition takes is a different story in itself.
Mm-hmm.
But normally it starts after some recognition of the prohibition of sexual orientation discrimination. And that's what you see internationally. Internationally, there is now some recognition of the fact that sexual orientation should not distinguish in law. And then following on, there is some case law on recognizing partnership. But if you look at the recognition of partnership as the main issue and claiming marriage as a form of that, then I'm going to take you on two of your statements. You say that the first step was in Denmark in '89. Denmark had already 10 years of partnership legislation, unregistered partnership legislation, before that. Similarly in France, when you say that the movement started in '97, that was already there were test cases, there was some legislation changing bit by bit. Similarly in the Netherlands and Sweden, even from the 70s. And Argentina and Spain, they had that sort of legislation nationally before they moved. So there was this sort of notion that incrementally you go to marriage. That has not been falsified yet, I think.
What's your question?
What's my question? You have criticized the old explanations of why countries do certain things. And then you propose two new factors. But the new factors apply for every country in the world. Yeah, they are global factors. And of course these global factors are there, and I really agree with the two you mentioned. But still, why do they have a different effect in Argentina than in Nigeria, or for the time being in Slovenia or Australia? Still, we need some factors for that. And I'm sure you have some ideas.
Totally opposite effect, because they're opposing same-sex marriage and they're forbidding it also in some countries.
Yeah, but why do some oppose or stall on it, and why do others go for it? That's still the question.
Yes. So on the first question, in my lecture I put that there were 3 or 4 steps, because I think that in the 2000 article there is a kind of opening. It's not clear whether there is an opening towards the 4th stage or not. In the way it is written, but maybe a misunderstanding from my side. So I put 3 or 4 steps. And then what I was thinking about South Africa, for instance. Was there anything before marriage? Or?
There was recognition of unmarried cohabitation, and it's all done by the Constitutional Court there. So it's an odd example, but they first recognized.
And the other thing I would say
rights.
is also, as far as I know, in many countries, several forms of unregistered partnership were not linked to kind of movements and social movements. And as I'm working, I looked more at social movements, and less at those as probably also the other.
Right, but Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands is definitely social movement as well.
Okay.
In the earlier.
But probably in France it wasn't a social movement, I would say.
That led to PACS.
No, before the PACS.
Yeah.
No, the PACS is a social movement. But what I said about France is about the marriage campaign in 1997. Is when Daniel Perillo published his report on this aid report on marriage, saying that the PACS wasn't to have. I didn't say that it was the PACS before.
Okay. Where's the question?
And anyway, what I'm saying also about the steps is that just the order is different.
But you still need all steps.
I mean, I don't know, I read this, I think it's Robert Rington who told me that there was no discrimination in Argentina.
Yeah, I don't know that.
He was explaining me, so he was saying that sometimes it comes at a different time. And in Belgium it happens different. It depends where you take a discrimination. But
Second question?
yeah, and the second question is that I agree, I mean, I don't try to explain the next step, for instance, Kelly Tolman she's kind of defending the same kind of things, but more about civil partnerships. She has finished the book, so it will cover the Netherlands, among other countries. And one part of the book is making the kind of argument that we're making about international norms, but the other part is about the domestic reception of norms, which is a real part of the literature. But I haven't said anything about this here. But it's really about why, for instance, international norms are widely accepted in some countries and they're not in others. And for instance, she makes a difference between Austria and Germany, saying that Austria is really reluctant to international norms and Germany is really open to international norms. And I think it also depends on the people who are there and specific actors. That sometimes you had connections in one country and you had a connection in another country. And I'm not saying that all the explanations are not working. I'm just saying that we need more explanations. That there are not only those factors, and more factors are needed.
Who wants to ask another question? Yeah,
it's not exactly a question, but it's more like a remark.
Can you speak up?
Yeah. It's more sort of a praise. I think there's always this great risk in comparative research to reify models and in sort of make asserting or listing all those very hardened models to contribute to the idea that it's not possible here, it will never ever happen there. And I think you really touched to the a critique of this performative, self-awareness of this performative dimension of structural discourse on models. And I think that the way that, in fact, studying a change, which is what you're doing, is a great antidote against this unreflexive performative conservatism, something like this. I think it's welcome.
Thank you. And I would say I think that it's true, it's one of the problems of comparative research. But I think also that most of the people who are doing comparative research, or they were comparing, for instance, just between Scandinavian countries, which are really similar, and probably most of these explanations, they work for Scandinavian countries, and probably also work for the Netherlands, but it also depends on which countries you're comparing with, and then you get to another picture.
Okay, who has another question? I'm surprised. I have so many questions to you, but
maybe one short question. What happened to all these people, to the gay movement that was still, what is it, in the Netherlands, I think, 1980 something? Nobody gay movement was aware of, was supporting an idea like same-sex marriage. You mentioned that. What happened with the energy of these people? Is that they have been silenced by this victorious concept of the same-sex marriage, or is there still a movement saying, yeah, we should work on equal positions between singles and married gays?
I will only answer about the cases I know, so mostly Belgium, Spain and France. First, some of these people just died because of AIDS, so that's one of the reasons. And certainly, secondly, some of these people changed. Also partly because of AIDS and partly because of other reasons, and they changed their mind. They suddenly discovered they were couples, they suddenly discovered that these couples were not protected and that kind of thing, so it's very important. Or they just thought that, Jeffrey Weeks has this article about sexual citizenship, and Jeffrey says that it was the first time to transgress a period and there is a time for citizenship. And he sees that as kind of two steps in the same process. And for some of the activists it happened. For instance, in Catalonia, Charlie Petit has been co-secretary of ILGA. It was really, in the 70s, kind of really strong trust-based discourse. And then he changed very early into, and he's still around. He's one of the few ones who's still around, but he changed in kind of more mainstream and another kind of discourse for lots of reasons. And then you have new people. For instance, kind of Spain, you have people like, my colleague Mancavo said that there is a different generation. In a generation not in terms of ages, not really, but more in terms of socialization. Where have you been trained as an activist? What are your preferences? What are you comparing things with? This kind of thing that happens. And he said, for instance, in the case of Spain, the early revolutionary activists from the 70s were mostly trained in the French school. They read Ockham and they read Miel from Italy, that kind of thing. And that the new, I don't totally agree with this biographical bit, but he said the new activists that were trained in the United States, and for some of them it's true, and others read other things coming from other places. And finally, just some people just retired. One of the founders of the PAX, Jean-Paul Coliquet, just totally is still alive. It's very hard to meet him. He works for the Maire de Paris, And he's really kind of hidden. He doesn't want to be part of the movement. And from time to time, he keeps saying that he's against marriage, and the fact was something against marriage, and he wanted to promote an alternative to it. But that's it. And he said, "But other people, they're stronger than me, and I will not do that anymore."
But how do you relate to, I guess, you say this is a story of progress and modernity, yeah? And I would say, if you look at the people I guess a lot of people in queer studies, so I've once seen Gary Bourne defending same-sex marriage in New York, and I guess the public was totally opposed to him. So they said, we don't want to have gays in military, we don't want to have same-sex marriage. We totally opposed to this idea of this kind of progress and modernity. And you have all these queer people. And so we had this afternoon, our course or so, had different people that discussed from queer art perspectives. And they they resist modernity. And I think it's very interesting to see you have this so-called idea of progress and modernity that defends civil rights for gay people, including same-sex marriage. At the other side, you have the queer studies people who oppose this as being, I would say, a stagnation, or how they want to develop to plural marriages, or to free sex, or whatever they want to do. And you have on the other side, also, I would say, the traditional people, like the people in the Middle East and in Africa, who oppose it. So what do you think this story is going to bring you in the end?
In what sense?
Well, so I guess the developments you're describing, there's I would say a middle road, and that defends a kind of normalization, so normativity in a sense. And at one hand, you have people who oppose anything of what is going beyond marriage and heterosexuality, and that's a very big group in Africa and the Middle East, and probably also have more underground in Europe. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, you have a group of people who oppose and sometimes ally also with, I would say, the conservatives, for the queer studies people.
No, I think these are the different debates on different stages. What I said is that no, it is more and more used as a sign of modernity in some countries. I mean, what Zapatero did also with gender equality, wanted to have lots of women on the picture of the government. So he said, look, I'm really modern. And he used that internationally to promote himself among European socialist leaders. So it's really how he used it, whether it's modern or not. I don't know. I would agree that, I mean, Daniel Barrio says that modernity is linked with enlightenment and that kind of thing. And indeed, if we could take that definition of modernity, same-sex marriage as equal rights is an application of enlightenment. And so it's really modern.
Well,
and some of the queer people, they're against modernity, they're postmodern or they're elsewhere. But
so enlightenment, so I would say that it doesn't back where everything fits in. Because we also quote Marquise de Sade, who also very different ideas of marriage, for example.
And then the other thing is, I think, I mean, the queer debate is really, I would say, first of all, I'm not really a big fan of queer studies. I would say first that it's probably a debate which is extremely highly located in some places, mostly the United States. And the way it has been translated in Europe and the way it has been imported in Europe is really interesting because it does give it something else than what it wasn't in the United States. But, and it's also really academic. And this debate on same-sex marriage is not really academic, it's more about politics, it's more about movement. So it takes place on another stage. So there are different places. And finally, I think you can do both things at the same time. Something, if you take the case of Didier Ripon or Daniel Barrio, what really, I mean, Daniel is really, if same-sex marriage is approved one day in France, he will be probably the father of gay marriage, or one of the fathers in France, as really the person promoting these ideas since 1997, promoting the main arguments in favor of marriage. At the same time, he's already criticizing same-sex marriage. Ripon does the same. Ripon is kind of reclaiming the heritage from the 70s, and the heritage of people like René Scherrer and those people. And it's really what Didier is doing at the moment. And kind of one year after this Bagel thing, Didier published a book criticizing it, saying that we need to keep inventing things and reclaiming Foucault. And Daniel is organizing in March a big conference in Spain, invited, where we are basically criticizing these kind of things altogether. And he comes to Brussels to present a queer version of family law.
I guess the board is also coming to Amsterdam to this set of meetings in, I guess, in April?
Sorry, in May.
In May,
May 18th.
Okay, who wants to ask another question? There we go again.
You mentioned progressive colonialism, and then in the end you have this, one of the main factor, transnational, international, and also this legal international discourse. Is that colonialism? And do you think it's right? Or are you just observing that it's happening? Or do you think there should be this type of colonialism?
Well, this expression about progressive colonialism is not from me. It's from two colleagues from San Francisco, and I got their paper and they wrote about the situation in Argentina. And the title is progressive colonialism, and I don't like the title.
No, but do you like the phenomenon?
I don't think it's... first, we live in a global world, so things are happening. And either we want it or not, it's happening first. So that's just a fact. And secondly, the thing is that I would say people are stupid. I mean, there is always this argument about stupid African people, stupid people elsewhere, that they don't know what they want, that they're imposed models and claims and arguments. And it's more complex. It's much more complex. I mean, if you take the Poles, for instance, in Europe, we could say that they've been imposed, and that's true. There have been a process of cooptation where Western organizations have chosen some Polish activists and not the others. But at the same time, I think that the current Polish activists are probably among the most clever in Europe. In terms of finding support, finding money absolutely everywhere in Europe. They know how to organize, they're really well organized. And they feel very well within that model. So I think they haven't been imposed that model. So I think it's not just about an imposition from elsewhere. It's also local people that really, I mean, in all those countries, in Africa, people are claiming that they want homosexuality to be decriminalized. So it's not only international or foreign people bringing things into the country, it's also local people. So I think it's more complex than just the imposition discourse. So I don't think it's colonialism, but it may happen partly. It depends. It depends on how it's done.
There's an anthropological book about Vrouwenheirat in Africa. So Africa is very famous for women's marriages. And if you think about Siba, that's an oasis in Egypt, it has also a more kind of pedophile marriage in the past. So there's also, I guess, a return of the marriage to Africa. May say so. Okay, who else? Yeah?
So maybe just one comment that now are mentioning about colonialism and comes to my mind, like, of course you're discussing very much same-sex marriage from here, let's say, send it to Africa or the Middle East, to these countries, they are stupid, they wanted to. But it comes to my mind, like the other side of the discussion. What would happen, do you think, if the debate about polygamy, to turn polygamy legal in the West, really takes hold? I don't know if it's a counter.
In Western Europe.
See, let's say like there is a move from gay rights very strong, Mexican, for example, from Mexico City, and I see this very strong, and it's right, I think is correct. But of course, it triggers in myself about this colonial kind of something that there is in this discourse about the right to send it to Iran, to send it to Africa, to send it because they should, they have the rights to, they need to fight. But what do you think will happen if, for instance, the debate of making polygamy legal in the Netherlands, in Mexico, in Argentina, it will be different than the discussion that you are kind of identifying with the same sex? Or, I don't know.
I don't think it's likely to happen. I mean, there are a few cases. There was a case in Canada. There was a court case, I think, but I don't know the result of it. Trying to legalize marriages between more than two people, and I think they were also discussing that at some point in the Netherlands.
There's been a group marriage, this debate by a Colombian, in fact, in Holland, but it was not largely supported. It was so court case, it was rejected in the Dutch court.
And I think it's not likely to happen. I mean, first, the thing is that globalization is also about power. I agree that I didn't go into that in the lecture, but the power is not going that way, it's going the other way. So an international media kind of thing. So that's still the world structure. But the other thing is that if you take the legal logic, it's very, I mean, I don't know, but I think it's very difficult to argue that it's an issue of equality, because there is no discrimination against gay people because they can only marry one person and not two, because no one else can marry two people. So it would be another kind of discourse. And I think one of the things that happened when I was saying that once they achieved their agenda in Spain or in Belgium is that logic of legal equality was kind of reaching its end. And what we can do, I mean, it's not equal yet. There's still lots of little things in family laws that haven't been equalized. So that's still the issue that we can solve that, and that's still part of the same logic. But I think the question of polygamy would imply going to another logic. I mean, Didier Ribon did in France when 1 year after Berg, he was writing about the 70s and 90s and inventing selves and this kind of thing.
But it's not the same logic, so it implies more changes.
No, but if you say, for example, it's a continuation of the legal right for straight people to have these two people married, you can say that's an extension of the legal right for 3 people or 4 people to have the same rights for 2 people to marry.
Yeah.
And you talk also about coalitions, and you can make very good coalition between gay marriage in Africa, and I guess plural marriage, and also in Africa.
Yes, but I don't know what it's those coalitions. I mean, I don't really believe in coalitional politics. I think it's very nice.
You talk about solidarity and partners.
But I mean coalitions between different social movements. I mean, it's really nice when you read it in books, but I'm not sure it really happened in politics. In a sense, for instance, if you take the case of Spain, at the same time there were the movement, like in Belgium, was asking for a national civil partnership law that doesn't exist. Because you have, I mean, almost all Spanish regions have a regional partnership law, but there are different laws. And then have problem of recognition of inter-regional law. And you have lots of legal problems. So the best solution would have been to have a national law and language for equality. There are 2 different issues. But then what happened is that the day marriage was approved in Spain, the Socialist Party just decided that the other issue was solved as well, and it disappeared from the agenda of the Congress. And what happened is that the issue of straight couples who didn't want to get married in countries where it has been approved, so very few ones. I mean, they have this new right thanks to the gay movement, but not because it was a coalition between a strong, organized, straight movement and the gay movement. It didn't really happen. So I don't really believe into that for that reason. And it's the reason why there is no one claiming that in Spain at the moment.
Okay. There is no question anymore. Then, thank you very much for the discussion. And the so, both the people who have come for the prize celebration and both for the lecture, I'll be going to the Compagnie Theater, I understand that's next door, for a drink, yeah? To be able to congratulate you with your prize and doing the lecture. Yeah? And just all kinds of private discussions together. Okay, the Compagnie Theater is next door in the number, what is it? Dan follow